And the first things first, I think we want to look at some of the criteria around fibromyalgia. And I want to be clear because so many people get what we would refer to as a misdiagnosis. You go to the doctor, and generally what happens is you have chronic pain, you go to the doctor runs tests to measure inflammation. And so you got these inflammatory tests that have been run. If those come back, these tests for inflammation, but also tests for like diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and lupus. So they're kind of ruling out with certain tests and certain antibodies, they're trying to rule out inflammation and lupus. If these come back and they're negative results and you struggle with these symptoms. So again, let's look at this list of symptoms if we can zoom in on this thing. So difficulty concentrating, so brain fog, right? Headaches, tender points on your body. And so these tender points are broken down into different areas, but generally these tender points are along the spinal muscles along the back, and they're also in certain segments and in certain joints. But multiple tender points across the body. If you struggle with sleep, falling asleep, insomnia, if you struggle waking up with morning time stiffness, ladies, if you have menstrual irregularities and or menstrual pain, and then as well some numbness and tingling, so what appears to be or feels like neuropathy in your hands or in your feet. If you have these types of symptoms and your doctor ran tests for inflammation or and lupus, those tests came back negative, it generally puts you in the category of fibromyalgia. In my opinion, is very simple. This diagnosis really is kind of a catch-all. You see how many different symptoms that we're talking about here. This diagnosis is a catch-all for a host of different problems. And if you think about it, all of these symptoms that we're talking about, what do they all have in common? They're the early indicators of an autoimmune process. So they're early indicators of autoimmune disease as well. And this is one of the reasons why I feel so strongly like when you get this diagnosis, what the doctor's really saying is, we don't really know what's wrong with you. We don't really have any tests that can indicate or find a problem. So we're going to shove you into this category of seronegative myalgia type of disease, or just basically I have muscle pain all over my body with a plethora of other kind of hazy symptoms that we can't quite define. That's fibromyalgia. And that's why, in my opinion, it's a cop-out diagnosis. It shouldn't be used to any great degree, because really what should happen is if you're struggling with all of these things, there's a reason why you're struggling with these things, and it's not just because you're cursed. You don't have this curse where your body's just breaking down on you and all these things are happening. There's something going on that's triggering this response. Now, accurately speaking, fibromyalgia, some people clarify the definition. A lot of your mainstream doctors, your primary care physicians, your rheumatologists, a lot of them will not clarify this element. But for true fibromyalgia, it's a neurological pain disorder. And when I say neurological, what I mean by that is it's a sensory processing disorder. What does that mean, sensory processing? It means that the message traveling from your brain to your body is oversensitized to pain. And so really, a lot of times where fibromyalgia begins, the neurological pain disorder is in the mind. And so we have to think, okay, well, what is it that triggers neurological dysfunction and miscommunication? And this is really, if you've got a true diagnosis of fibromyalgia, where your doctor should be starting. But again, very few of them do. They jump to the diagnosis, and then from the diagnosis jump straight into multiple different types of medications for pain management. Some of them are you could anywhere from non-steroidal anti-inflammatories to some of the pain management drugs to some of the neurological drugs like gabapentin. Like, these are the common things that doctors will throw at you, not understanding the why, only understanding that they wanted to lump you in that category. So I'm not a big fan of that category or being put into that category. Now, fibromyalgia typically affects mostly women. You can see 85-95% of those that get a diagnosis of fibromyalgia are female. Now, that being said, is that because females are more affected, or is that because men don't go to the doctor? You know, I would say you got to look at both of those factors, because most men are stoic. They'll walk around, you know, half their arm is bleeding off, and they still won't go to the doctor unless their wife badgers them enough to do it. And so men typically don't go to the doctor. We expect to see women with a much higher level of diagnosis because men stoically push through pain. Now, that being said, it's still more common in females. And generally speaking, it's a younger age group, 30 to 60-year-old part of the population. So in essence, this disease, fibromyalgia, affects 4 to 5% of the 30 to 60-year-old population. So again, these are just some stats about fibromyalgia. Now, all in all, doesn't matter whether you're a man or woman. If you're struggling with chronic pain, I want to make a few other differentiations. So I said that, you know, true fibromyalgia is a neurological, right, sensory processing. It's a neuro condition. There are other conditions like myalgia, which is muscle. That's primarily what myalgia means, is it means muscle pain. So generally, myalgia is a diagnosis. Sometimes they overlap. Sometimes they're used as synonyms, even though technically they're not synonyms. Myalgia is different than fibromyalgia. Myalgia is in the muscle. It's pain in the muscle. It's muscle pain, again, typically without trauma, without any kind of injury, you know, no car crashes or no, you know, sprains or strains or anything like that, but it's just a chronic pain that sets into the muscle. So myalgia, a little bit different than fibromyalgia, whereas this is neurologically how you perceive pain. This is actual pain that's stemming directly. And I know some of you are saying, well, who cares? What's the difference? Why the nuance? The nuance is if you're trying to actually get your doctor to listen to you and pay attention and run the right types of tests, that's the nuance. Because if we're talking about true myalgia, there are certain tests that will help us pick up on that. Tests like creatine kinase, CK, is a test that measures the breakdown of muscle tissue, which sometimes is an indicator for myalgia. There are tests like LDH, lactase dehydrogenase, which is another enzyme that can be released as a result of the muscles. There's other tests like ALP, alkaline phosphatase, is an enzyme also can be released by damaged muscle tissue. So there's different types of lab tests, you know, that can be measured to kind of differentiate between the two, because if you have a true myalgia, your muscles breaking down, there are several reasons this can happen. And those reasons can be different than these reasons for fibromyalgia. And that's why it's important to get differentiation. So if your doctor diagnosed you with fibromyalgia but never even mentioned that it's a neurological sensory processing disorder of pain, where your perception of pain is skewed, and that starts in the brain, and they never differentiated between these two, it's time to find somebody else who will make that differentiation for you so that you can get an accurate diagnosis. Because again, the diagnosis matters because the treatment is going to change depending on which one of these. There's some overlap between them, but depending on which one you actually have, there is some overlap, but they can also be very, very different. Hey, don't forget to check out the rest of the series right here. Make sure you hit subscribe below. And as always, thanks for tuning in.